Well, good morning. I'm pleased to join all of you today with the second day of Cyber and Ag. I've been part of the planning process since day one, along with Mike Tilkey and Andrew Rose. I represent the Cybersecurity Association of Maryland. I sit in the board of directors for the past 3 years, and very excited to be bringing this event to the agricultural community, as most of us feel in the cyber community at the association that we have not provided the level of education that we would have liked to provide the ag industry and the food industry in the state of Maryland. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Todd. Todd Cronin is Assistant Vice President of Managed Cybersecurity Services for Plex Cyber. He started his career off in the United States Air Force. And he actually was on the front lines of validating and testing very large systems for satellite and aircraft for the U.S. Air Force. And he has parlayed that work into providing commercial industry, tremendous penetration testing services, and managed services for critical infrastructure and business. Mark has joined us. Yay, Mark.
Hey.
Good to see you. I was just introducing Todd, so I'm going to jump to you. Mark Stacey is with Dragos, as I had mentioned, and he has 15 years of experience in providing cybersecurity and digital forensics incident response for both the federal government as well as the commercial industry. He's currently Director of Professional Services for Dragos, really the cybersecurity company that's focused on securing industrial networks. And I love this, but they really focus on preparing, detecting, and responding to security threats and protecting, what is your moniker?
Safeguarding civilization.
Safeguarding civilization, which I think is wonderful. Great. So I'll just give a brief overview and then I'll start the panel discussion. We learned yesterday from our plenary speakers that modern day agriculture is dependent upon increasingly running their businesses on IoT and OT, which undoubtedly comes with inherent benefits, but also tremendous security challenges. An IoT network where data is constantly collected and shared without much regulation really increases the chances of sensitive data inadvertently ending up in the hands of undesirable parties. The data in IoT is also vulnerable to deliberate theft and modification, which makes conducting business in IoT considerably risky. Based on this, I'd love to ask our panelists today to give the audience your thoughts on the state of cybersecurity in agriculture. Mark, do you want to start?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, sorry I was late. Turns out head of security, we still have our spam sensors. So I had to talk to IT and dig it out. So we face the same IT challenges. I think with previously, when we look at like IT networks and protecting them, it was much more straightforward on you have common operating systems, Windows, Linux, Mac, but more the geographic footprint. And if we think of the logical footprint of the network, it was much easier to find. When we start looking at like critical infrastructure, the whole concept of what a critical network is and the supporting assets of critical infrastructure, it really exploded. And defining what the network is much more difficult. If we think of intellectual property, now it could be buried in the ground. How do you control that? A network may be a single autonomous vehicle, and how that information is relayed. It may go through an ISP or through multiple routing points before it ever gets to something that we would call like a network core. So really defining that and protecting that is the first challenge on what are you trying to protect. The second side of that, the threat landscape. I think my eyes have really been opened on who would target what. Certainly, we all understand commodity is not going anywhere. ransomware has been around for a while. I think we'll continue to be talking about it. Hopefully that'll come up later on. We can go into some more details. But aside from commodity, targeted attacks are not just terrorism or terrorists. There's intellectual property theft, but really anywhere where there could be an economic impact. And I think a good example is I worked with a friend in Italy a couple of years ago, and they found a huge impact on their GDP from China. And in investigating it, they found out that in Italy, fashion is a big deal, and they have one fashion show once a year. And the adversary was compromising the personal laptops of the designers. And so after the Italian fashion show, it would be 6 months later and the pieces would be released to the public. China could manufacture the pieces using the same material, ship them to Italy, have a single button or zipper sewn on so they could say it was made in Italy, and release the same garments the next day. The designers never thought that they would be targeted. No one connected the dots until it was already taking place. So when we think about who would target agriculture, it isn't just terrorists who want to disrupt supply chain of sustenance or anything to the population. It may be other impacts or other scenarios that we haven't considered yet. A couple other quick thoughts. The impacts are not fully known either. With intellectual property theft, I take it, I know the data's value, I can quantify that. The impact in this area is unknown. If I plant seeds 2 inches deeper, will that affect germination? How long will the soil be impacted if I affect the fertilization rate? And the adversaries don't even know the impact. We can't certainly talk about cyber without talking about Stuxnet as a good example. So when an adversary develops a tool, they deploy it in their target environment, the full impacts, the full ramifications, they don't understand, and we don't understand them now. So conducting any type of crown jewel analysis is much more difficult. And then the final note on where we are now, I think understanding accountability is hard to lock down. Certainly the government has put some efforts towards it, but who's responsible for protecting your tractor out there on the farmland or your water metering facility? Is it the government? If there is a compromise, who's responsible for responding? Is it the OEM or who? I think ultimately we know that we need to improve. People are taking it serious. They just don't know where to start. What I would say is ICS and really critical infrastructure is very community-based, but we think still of individual communities. The architecture networks I've seen are not that different from renewable energy, where a wind turbine is an individual network and it's dispersed across multiple states or countries. Agriculture is kind of a similar footprint. And so work within the community, but let's look at the peers and our sister verticals and sectors and see what's working there and really think of the community as critical infrastructure rather than an individual market.
That's actually great advice, Mark. I hope that conversations like this will start generating more interest in information sharing throughout this industry. Todd, how about you?
Well, I think Mark made a lot of really good points, and I just want to build on those and start with kind of the opportunity that attackers see in the agriculture business, more specifically in America. I think is all of our attendees probably from the States here, Christina?
Yes, from the attendee list.
Interesting. Okay, so that actually is really good because of the point that I want to bring up, which is probably not new to everyone else here. But if you look around the world, we have this whole global economy that operates, and agriculture is very much a part of that. And in one example, I'm sure there's many others like this, but if we look at China, China has the largest middle class that they have ever had in their history. And there's some interesting statistics about middle class eating habits that are important to the agricultural industry. And that is that they start to consume more protein. This isn't research I've done myself. This is actually information I heard from a renowned economist a couple years ago as he was kind of projecting the financial future of America. And his comment was that in the coming years, and we're seeing it even now, China is going to become more dependent on protein sources from around the world. They have tons of arable land, yes, but they don't have the infrastructure to support that growing middle class. So they'll rely on those agricultural infrastructures that exist already, like America. As a result, you know that those protein-based diets. In this case, we're talking meat. The cattle industry relies heavily on the production of corn. So you have an opportunity here of looking at a critical function of the agricultural industry in America, where corn is already a part of all of our daily lives, but is going to play a much greater global role in that global economy. So maybe not direct threats from China, but if you could think of other threat groups that may want to target that process of getting more protein heavy ingredients to those needing it in a growing middle class in China, then you can see that attackers now have an opportunity. That's really where cyber attacks start, is with an opportunity to gain success in whichever motivation those threat actors have. And a lot of times, obviously, that's financial. And in this case, like Mark mentioned, what we'll probably see at the end of that is some ransomware campaigns that hold up the corn production in America, and not to impact the ability for anyone in the rest of the world to consume either corn products or more proteins, but simply to get paid out because it's a critical function, right? So I just wanted to mention that as kind of the one example of an overarching opportunity that attackers see in the agricultural world. And in terms of where ag is with cybersecurity, I see it as a spectrum of how they are balancing functionality with security. This is not unique to ag. This is, in fact, something that every industry deals with. I saw that, like Christina mentioned, I did a lot of work in the United States Air Force testing satellite systems and aircraft, whose goals are primarily functionality. You need your satellites to function correctly. You need your aircraft to function correctly. Security becomes an afterthought. And a lot of times that afterthought is only triggered by some event that creates an impact to those systems. So ag is very much in those early stages of trying to strike that balance between functionality and security. I am not aware of a very prominent or large impactful cyber attack that's happened in the agricultural industry to date that's had wide-ranging effects, like some that we've seen in other industries, like breach of private data with the Equifax hack, and the destruction of nuclear capabilities with the Stuxnet attack, things like that. It's yet to really happen in the ag industry. So the fact that this symposium is happening right now is actually a really good sign that ag is thinking forward and learning from, like Mark said, sister industries on how they've struck that balance between functionality and security. I don't think you'll ever find that balance is outweighed on the security side, because then your priorities, your expenses, your processes, and everything become more about security than really providing the outcome that the ag needs to in all its different facets. So so I think that would be my kind of take on where ag is in terms of security. There's a large opportunity for ag to become even more critical than it is now, not just in America, but globally. And and we're on a spectrum of that balance. And I think we're at the beginning, but we're doing the right things.
Thanks, Todd. We can see certainly from the pandemic, we're experiencing a lot of industrial espionage as it relates to vaccines. It's been written numerous times over the past 6 months that there has been an increase on intellectual theft from the pharmaceutical industry. And I think that we could actually take some parallels around that, because in ag, in terms of seed, in terms of the right climate for growth of crops, the right mix of food for livestock, there is always intellectual property around the secret sauce of growing either products or livestock. So how can we leverage other industries to provide best practices for agriculture? And I'm talking from two different perspectives. One is from a corporate network, because corporate networks of organizations like a Purdue Farms, that we'll be talking to later, depend upon operations, and operations can be supply chain, operations can be sensors, it can be operational technologies that are working the manufacturing facilities. So from two perspectives, what are the best practices from maybe 3 or 4 recommendations from a corporate network point of view, and then from an IOT, OT, that's Internet of Things and operational technology point of view of securing infrastructure. So I'll give Todd the network side, the corporate network side, and I'll ask Mark to talk about the IoT, OT side.
I think that's a great division here. The great thing about cybersecurity is, no matter the industry, we're all using, when it comes down to it, processors, right? I mean, and these processors are built in different ways, but they all essentially have the same functionality, but have many different purposes. So on the corporate side, it's really important that we understand where all of our processing is happening. So step number one, and I say this to every client we've ever had, when they ask, hey, what if I've got, X amount of whatever time, budget, resources, what's the first thing I need to do? There's a lot of shiny things you could do and buy and have fun with, but the absolute first thing you have to do is know your inventory. What are your assets? What are you even operating? Agriculture may experience this. I'd bet dollars to donuts that you do, because we see it everywhere else, that there is a lack of full understanding of what all technology is deployed for any specific system. Whether that's, printers, routers, laptops, mobile devices, things like that. The absolute first thing you have to do is know what you have and what you're operating. If you don't know what you're operating, you won't be able to secure it. And there's a handful of steps after that. In this case, we'll talk about IoT devices. So Mark, I'll pass that on to you now, and you can talk about that.
Thank you, Todd. I think that the approach and methodologies, regardless of the network, persist. And in my view, similar to what Todd said, step one is certainly asset inventory. If you to go with the cliches, know thyself, or any of the monikers, but the first action in my mind is visibility. I don't understand how you could justify return on investment or quantify or qualify any security control if you can't identify its impact. And you have to have visibility over the network to do that. Where that gets to be really hard is, again, with that geographic footprint that a lot of agriculture has, where it could be, again, autonomous vehicles or different metering systems or sensor moisture tracking. Each one of those can be considered its own network. You've got some coming in through a 4G network. You've got others over a Wi-Fi. How do you monitor those? You can't deploy a 1U, server rack mount. You can't put a network tap in place. And so what does that visibility really mean? I don't have a good answer for that now. I think collectively we're all trying to figure that out. But that's really step one, is what do I have? And then you can really identify, take a prioritized approach on what needs to be protected. And so the base fundamentals on protection, detection, response. You need visibility for all of those, and your approach may change. But I think when we talk about like crown jewel analysis or understanding what is critical on the network, I work with a lot of different companies in consulting. Every network, it depends on who I ask. If I ask the board, I get a very different answer than someone else. The most reliable source for that information are the engineers. Go to the ground and ask them, what is the worst day? Everything's important, but what is critical? What will bring us down below our operational threshold? The engineers, the operators are absolutely the right ones to ask. And if those are, the farmers or the vendors or who else in your network, they really identify the critical asset, not the network, not the subnet, but the asset. And that's where I'd say you can start working towards that PDR approach, that protection, detection, response approach.
Yeah, and if I could, I'll add to that as well that, in the IoT world, deploying SCADA type equipment, these program logic controllers that are controlling and monitoring certain things. It's really important that as all that data comes together, after you've identified it and know where your devices are, where your data paths are, and your engineers tell you what is most critical, that you come up with a plan to protect that. And I think in the ag world, what's really important, it's a parallel to the SCADA environments. Mark would probably attest to this as well, that you need to ensure that those systems that are most critical, monitoring, controlling processes for agricultural production, are segmented from any sort of networks that are used for business, corporate type events. In the oil and gas industry, the number one threat to their production from a cyber attack perspective comes in through a vector where they're able to compromise enterprise or the corporate networks, and then jump from corporate networks into that operational technology network. It's not an easy solution to deploy, segregating segmenting operational technology and traditional corporate IT, but it is something that it's a worthy effort, if you will, to undergo, to try to create that type of infrastructure. So in terms of best practices, I think that's something that the agricultural industry should really take and learn from oil and gas and other like public transport industries who have in some cases learned this lesson the hard way. Wouldn't you say, Mark?
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, so it's a combination. Know yourself, configure yourself correctly, and then what I'd add finally is, and Mark alluded to this, monitor and test. So you're going to put a bunch of time, resources into building out a secure infrastructure, and you want to make sure that investment is working, correctly, and you do that through monitoring it, not only the performance of whatever solutions you have in place, but also doing testing, which, the world that I come from is, we conducted what's called adversarial emulation against these weapon systems that the Air Force purchased and built themselves. So we would take on the role of a known adversary, against a satellite system, and uncover the vulnerabilities that they may have used to exploit it. agriculture is no different, right? You're going to have threats like we talked about before, who are going to try to exploit you for their own gains. Being able to test your environments in a way that represents what they would do before they do it is immeasurable in terms of the value that you gain from that. So it's definitely three parts: know yourself, configure yourself correctly, and then monitor and test as that third part.
Yeah, thanks, Todd and Mark. It got me thinking about, there's identify, detect, protect, respond, and recover, which is the NIST the NIST framework, the National Institute of Science and Technology framework that was created. We talked a bit about the first three. I'd love to ask Mark about respond and recover. Because that's a central point of what he does on a daily basis, as he's involved in incident response and forensic analysis of an event. Number one, have you been part of any ag or food manufacturing or production incident response engagement? And if you have, we'd love to hear about it, certainly in a way that you can talk about it. And if you haven't, what would the recommendation be from your perspective on preparation for the inevitable? Because we know at some point it's going to happen. And as a practitioner, I go into organizations and conduct risk assessments, and it depends on the maturity of the organization, but a lot of folks are not ready to respond and recover from an incident.
Great question. We being Dragos, we have done incident response, I'll say within manufacturing, which is pretty wide intentionally. And with the network topology that we're facing in this sector, it is kind of applying basic concepts on forensic analysis and the approach and volatile data. The difference is it's all new territory. Vendors don't have guides. They either don't publish or they don't know the memory structure of the device or how to go about it. There's no Stack Overflow or website on how to do forensics for a cryogenic freezer for seeds. And so facing the response incident, a lot of times it is first learning what you're working with, getting the OEM or vendor manufacturer and going from there. But again, it's that whatever is a return to service. So if you do have a large scale incident and it's geographically dispersed, we run through a lot of tabletops with entities who say, all right, well, let's say the compressor has been misconfigured, so we'll validate all the other compressors. What's next? It's like, well, hold on, let's talk through that. How many people in your organization are regionally located by a compressor? Who has the knowledge to pull the config file and validate whether or not it's accurate? And when we start talking about that, and it's like, oh, well, it'd take a week to fly via private helicopter to each one of these locations because there's only one person with the tribal knowledge to maintain it. And so I realize I'm clarifying the problem here. I think that the key is not how do we fix everything? How do we do forensics on every device? It's how do we return to service? How do we at least get to an operational capacity to dampen so we can survive, and then we can rebuild with the vendor and everyone else involved. With all the control systems, you have to work with the vendors. A lot of times you have to work with the OEMs and the manufacturers. And so those relationships are important to maintain. If you have an incident, if there's malware written for their device, they have an interest. And so they want to work with you. They want to help improve because their business survivability depends on it as well. And so I think maintaining those relationships, and again, knowing what's on your network. If someone says you're compromised and you don't know what you have on the network, you don't know what the assets are, you'll have a very hard time recovering there.
You actually brought up a really good point. one of the areas that I've consulted in is third-party risk management. And very early on in the days of integrating that into enterprise risk management. And third-party risk management is tricky because you have vendors that really don't want you asking too many questions about their own corporate security posture and that of the device that's been deployed. Can you talk, either one of you talk a bit about how to communicate to vendors the importance of that relationship and the importance of integrating that knowledge of what's on your network and what's attached to your network, like a vendor asset, where it could be a sensor, for example, guys, within the agricultural community, knowing what the configuration is, what looks normal, what doesn't look normal. Have you had any experience in those types of discussions?
Yeah, so I'll kick this one off. There's a concept in corporate IT called change management. Change management is an effort that IT teams will take on in order to track version numbers, equipment swap outs, specific software that's being used, a variety of different aspects of each piece of equipment that is very difficult to compile if you're in full operation and you're just thinking about change management now, and you've got a fully operational network going on. With the problems that Mark mentioned about this kind of a lack of functionality that would allow IT teams to be able to, from a central location, pull things like configurations of PLCs, sensors, so on and so forth. You're having to go out and do things manually. A couple chopper lifts later, and you've got a couple kilobytes of data that you needed, which is a lot of effort for a little bit of data. So in one solution or one approach to kind of nip that in the bud, pun definitely intended for this conference, is to implement change management as soon as you can, meaning before you even deploy that first sensor that's going to run your operational network. Be sure you keep a record of, okay, what was the configuration file, keep a copy of it securely. Whenever it gets updated, make sure you have a process and people in place to update your change management system, that this new configuration is out there. And the reason you want to do that is because of another really important input into the overall balance between functionality and security, and that is understanding the threats that are out there. Threat being a full combination of risk that includes who is targeting you, what are they targeting. MITRE does a really good job of keeping track of known vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities are disclosed to them. Some of them remain private. Some of them do become public, but they do keep a record. And as a organization running an agricultural operation, you can track all of those. If you have an updated change management system, which really plays back into that asset inventory idea as well, you can compare and monitor what vulnerabilities are out there and how they affect your your deployment of assets. Do you have a sensor in a field far away that just had a vulnerability release that is impactful? Then now you have insight into what you need to go change in order to reduce your risk. So I think that's definitely something. One, it's something that's done on corporate networks on a daily basis. Some cases on an hourly basis, right? And it's something that can be applied to you all as well.
That's good. We have a couple of questions. So Catherine's asking, many farmers use multiple software and APIs to conduct their work. how can a farmer safeguard his operation when any one vendor may have vulnerabilities in their, I would say, deployed assets?
Yeah, Mark, I'll pass this one off to you in a second with just one comment, which is anytime you're going to integrate with somebody else and it's not your own environment. By the way, this includes schools who integrate with students that are now remote learning, logging into school networks. You need to treat those integrations as untrusted assets as far as you can without affecting functionality. Meaning, John Deere says, hey, we've got this integration where your corporate network or your sensors can link back to our cloud. We can link back to you and do X, Y, and Z. Okay, that's great, but there's a connection that's leaving our network. We need to treat that as an untrusted connection, meaning we need to absolutely make sure we're monitoring what traffic is going on there, who's got access, what levels, things like that.
Yeah, I think maybe to tie it to the previous question on maintaining the vendor relationships, we at Dragos, we have a hard time with this because we're a security company. We do firmware reverse engineering all the time. We've done an engagement with a client, pen test or whatever, and we've had the vendor hit us out on the side and say, we don't want you in there. We don't authorize you guys to see our devices, even though the customer did. And so as a third-party security vendor, we have to walk the line. What has worked very well for us is maintaining trust, showing best interest. And I think with like asset owner and vendor, that relationship largely feels kind of like regulatory compliance with the government and some verticals, where as a vendor, if you find out a vulnerability, you're going to hold as an asset owner, if you hear of a vendor vulnerability, you're going to hold the vendor accountable. You want them to improve, similar to an oversight committee. The best way to do that and to have the vendor work with you is to get together as a community. Realize it doesn't just affect your network. Tell the vendor, hey, we're not publishing this out on the internet. We want to work with you. We've had good success in doing joint engagements with the vendor and an asset owner together. And in one instance, in a new vertical, the asset owner reached out to the vendor and said, we're going to hire this company to come in and rip apart your firmware and tell us where it's vulnerable. Tell us what the impact could be. Do you want to go in on it with us? And it was almost like two neighbors, splitting a fence. So showing the best intent and working together as a community to either have the backing or the shared voice, I think is really a good path forward.
Actually, that's a nice segue into a question from Marjorie. She said a company that makes seed may have multitude of data sources going in and out, and that's just one company. There are retailers, co-ops, fertilizer companies, consultants, agronomists, software companies, data companies. I can't see how cyber can be addressed for ag, except for at an industry association or government regulation level. Todd, Mark, do you have any thoughts on that?
I would agree. And I think that goes back to the accountability. We all talk about security, who's accountable for it. Not to get into the weeds, but DHS is foreign. FBI is the only agency that's authorized, collect or investigate U.S. citizens. FBI is not a first responding agency. So if you're compromised, there's InfraGard, there's multiple DOE entities, the ISAC, CRISP, multiples. None of those are first responding agencies. Who's accountable for the protection and response? And I think everybody's afraid they'll be compromised. If you are compromised by yourself, likely it is a competitor, potentially espionage, intellectual property theft. Oftentimes, the fastest path to resolution is to rebuild, clean up where you can. If I am an adversary and my action on objective is national impact or loss of life to a supply chain, I'm going to go after the vendor, to Marjorie's point. I'm not going to target an individual farm or processing plant. I'm going to target a distribution center, or I'm going to target an OEM website and modify the firmware so everyone who downloads it will be impacted. So thinking about what you can do, I think it is establishing those open lines of communication to your peers. Someone did get compromised. Was it commodity? Was it a competitor or espionage? Or was it something bigger that as an overall agriculture community, we need to come together and start working towards? So no simple answer. I wish I had something better. I think what we need to do is really just establish those relationships up, down, sideways, and make sure that even with our competitors, we're sharing where it's appropriate.
So I was going to add to that, Marjorie. So this was similar to the financial industry back in the day, where the large banks they were really keeping what was happening siloed. They didn't want to share anything. They didn't want anyone to know what was happening. And finally, they said, okay, we have a need. We have to share what's happening within our industry so we can prevent the exploitation of our financial infrastructure for the greater good. So they created the FSISAC, which is the Financial Services Information Sharing organization, and there's a number of other industry organizations that have modeled themselves after that. And it's a give-take relationship. Big banks share what they're seeing. Small banks are watching it. They're putting safeguards in place to prevent what the big banks have experienced. And they're all learning at the same time from each other. So I think it's a mix. I think it's industry and government working together to ensure that everyone's keeping abreast of what's happening in the industry and the impact on the economy and the food supply when it comes to agriculture. We're about 4 minutes over. I'll call for any last minute questions, and you can feel free just to go ahead, Todd.
You mind if I just add to this question? Just real quick, I think we might be able to predict the future a bit here with what's going to happen with ag. It happened with financial industry, like Christina's mentioning here. Organizations formed together, realizing that data needed to be shared. But in terms of the actual data that is unique to agriculture, that's being transferred between all these entities that you listed, Marjorie, if you look at internet commerce, if you look at really just the ecosystem of the internet, between social media, everything that's present there, as well as the medical industry, who has a plethora of data as well, you can see what they've done to address data security from a industry and government level. So in just personal information generically has been addressed by GDPR and CCPA. GDPR being the EU's answer to data privacy, and then CCPA being California's answer. Other states are following in suit. Colorado did as well. So they have these policies in place that discuss what type of data exists, how it should be protected, and obviously, penalties if they're not. The question is, are they being enforced well? And then
companies in ag tech have to follow GDPR and the California because
exactly.
we work globally and nationally.
So those definitely relate to your global and national clients and the data that they're sharing with you. But if you look at the medical industry, you have HIPAA, which is data privacy relating to very specific types of data. I wouldn't be surprised if the agricultural industry developed their own set of classifications of data and measures that allow organizations to become compliant with protecting them. Now that's really just a compliance perspective, right? GDPR, HIPAA, all of that is just compliance. Going beyond compliance is what's going to keep everything secure, operational, right? And that's where what Mark and I were talking about earlier in terms of, steps 1, 2, and 3 of what you do are really important. But I just wouldn't be surprised if here in the near future, the agricultural industry develops their own set of data protection policies like GDPR and CCPA and HIPAA.
I just want to add for everyone in the chat section, Mark Johnson has added that the IISAC has a special interest group for food and ag. And he has the address there. It's www.it-isac.org/special interest groups. Yes, Mark, I do agree with you. It'd be hard for a small firm to utilize it. But for those medium and larger size ag organizations, it should be a must to integrate into their threat intelligence programs.
And even small farms ought to be able to pull those threat intel feeds and at least now learn from what's being shared. Maybe not be able to react to it immediately because of resources.
Or on the education side.
Yeah, right. And that's, I think, something that we haven't really talked about in this panel. I'm not sure we're going to have time for it, but, education for the engineers all the way up to the owners of how agriculture can be impacted by cyber.
Well, we are covering at the next session workforce and education issues.
Oh, okay.
It won't touch more of the on the ground engineers, but it will talk about the deficit of the workforce and what skill sets are required for operational technologies, IoT, and IT infrastructure in ag. So that should be a very interesting topic, and I'm moderating that, so I think we need to jump. I can leave this open if you want to continue discussing the issue, or I can close it. You guys just let me know.
I'm happy to stick around to answer any questions. Looks like Mark is as well. So
I want to thank both our panelists today. Thank you so much, Mark and Todd. I really appreciate the time that you've provided us. And for the attendees, thank you for joining us. We look forward to continuing this discussion. There's been talk between F3 Tech, CAMI, that we will try to keep this as a regular symposium, maybe every 5 to 6 months, so that we can continue the discussion and hopefully identify problem sets that the cybersecurity community can help fulfill for the ag community. So thank you all.
thanks for having us, Christina.
Okay, take care.